On the desolate shore where Seabreeze Manor stood tall like a relic of the past, the story of a woman began not with the glow of spotlights or the sound of applause, but with silence, the kind of silence that had clung to her for 10 long years. This is not the story of a typical inheritance dispute, nor is it a family drama dressed up in flowery words. This is the journey of someone once treated as an outsider, once erased from parties and photographs, only to one day return not to demand anything, but to prove that memories, when held by a steadfast heart, will never allow themselves to be forgotten. This story has no clear villains, only silence, truth, and the one woman brave enough to risk everything to reclaim what she knew for certain. This was the part of her life that truly belonged to her. I wasn't invited. Not this year. Not last year. Not for the past 10 years. I, Nora Collins, still remember the last time I got an invitation from the Marston family, the Christmas party, when I was still young, still believing that if I just kept trying, if I just kept enduring, someday I would be welcomed as part of the family. But for the past 10 years, there hasn't been a single message asking how I am, not one word of explanation. Only an invisible void that I had to fill by myself with work, with endless, exhausting days, with the cold nights in a city that never felt like home. That Tuesday, I opened an email with a familiar subject line: Marston Family Getaway 2025, RSVP by Friday. The words were cheerful, eager, trying so hard to sound warm, like the perfect family portrait. I already knew before I even clicked that my name would be nowhere on that list. But I clicked anyway. I looked anyway. Cecilia, of course, with her bright smile and that husband who's always glued to her side. Aunt Viola, still elegant in her sea green linen dress despite her age. I read every line as if scrolling through a movie I would never be allowed to join. And then the image of Seabreeze Manor appeared, a wide-angled photo with its pristine white porch paper lanterns glowing in the breeze. The house where my father once laughed, once reached out to catch me when I fell off the first step. The house where every childhood memory of mine lay, like seashells in the sand glimmering soft. Now it lay on a real estate listing page. Beneath the words, price reduced, owner must sell, transfer papers under review. I read and reread them like someone who had lost her bearings. No group message, no phone call saying, "Just so you know, Nora." Not one word. I knew by now that it no longer surprised me. It hurt, yes, but it didn't surprise me anymore. I closed the listing tab, but the words, "transfer papers under review," still echoed in my head, looping over and over. I sat there motionless for several minutes, and my home office in Seattle suddenly felt foreign, the framed degrees on the wall and the travel photos fading before my eyes. I didn't feel angry. Not immediately. My anger didn't explode like a storm. It seeped in slowly, like the salt of the sea, clinging to my skin, just waiting for time to turn it into a scar. What I felt when I read that real estate listing wasn't fury, it was emptiness. The emptiness of someone who had grown too used to being invisible, too used to pretending nothing was happening in the family photos I wasn't in the happy stories where my name was never mentioned. They always told me I was too sensitive, that I withdrew and blamed others. But no one remembered how many times I sent Christmas gifts when my name wasn't even on the gift list. No one remembered that I helped Mom pay off a small loan when money ran low, that I booked a flight home for Thanksgiving, only to sit quietly at the kitchen table while they laughed about far-off plans that didn't include me. I didn't resent them for the dismissive words, didn't resent the way they treated me like an old decoration in a house everyone insisted belonged to the family. I just found it funny and sad. Cecilia, my older sister, had always been the center of every party, the one everyone's eyes turned to. She had a way of telling stories so vivid, a warm smile that made everyone believe she was the glue holding us all together. I used to tell myself that all I had to do was step back, give her that space, and then they would see me for who I was in my own way. But 10 years passed, and there was still only room for Cecilia, for Mom, for their shining stories. And me? I was still just a name they forgot when they raised their glasses to each other. Maybe I should be grateful that at least I still had my small room in Seattle, where I built each brick myself, decorated each corner with things I chose. There, I could work late into the night without worrying about anyone's judgment. There, I could listen to the rain tapping at my window and imagine those evenings under the eaves of Seabreeze Manor, the place I still believed was my home. But that very day, when I saw the words "owner must sell," I realized they didn't just want to erase me from the family photo. They wanted to erase me from the memories of Seabreeze Manor. They wanted to sell the house where I once heard my father whisper, "Nora, this place is yours. It holds the memories no one can take from us." I leaned back in my chair, letting the last light of the day stream through the window pane, knowing that the one thing I couldn't do now was stay silent. And as the sharp sting of anger finally dulled, I felt a strange calmness spreading through me. A calmness of someone who at last could see the truth. If they had crossed my name off, then I would be the only one who could rewrite this story. I began searching not out of hope, but out of something else. Something quieter and colder, the curiosity of someone who no longer believes in promises. I searched as if turning over every page in an old book where every detail could speak the truth. Isabel, the well-known agent tied to Seabreeze Manor, was the first clue. I found her phone number in an old real estate ad, her voice coming through the line, soft but distant, as if she was too used to calls filled with suspicion. "Oh, Nora." She hesitated when I mentioned Seabreeze Manor, then quickly shifted to talk about how the transfer paperwork was still under review. I didn't need to hear more. Just the way she paused for a beat before she said sorry was enough for me to know there was something being hidden. I nodded faintly when we ended the call, then turned to Jasper. He was still the same calm, precise, his voice, like the anchor keeping me from drifting away in my anger. "Could you check it out for me?" I asked without needing to explain. He understood. Somehow, Jasper always understood. He called back a few hours later, his voice low and steady. "The transfer paperwork is awaiting confirmation, but there's a clause that most people miss, a subclause in your father's trust. If the house isn't properly managed, or if there's evidence of neglect, the second heir has the full right to ownership." My hand gripped the phone, my palm hot. I remembered how careful my father always was, how every word he wrote in his will felt like he had foreseen this day. They, my mother Cecilia, might believe they had all the rights to the house. They might be certain that my name was absent from the parties, the photos taken on the porch strung with golden lanterns. But they forgot that I was still there in every grain of wood, every stone lining the path to the door. They forgot that my father built Seabreeze Manor not just out of bricks and tiles, but out of memories he never fully entrusted to anyone, not even Cecilia. When Jasper sent me the scanned copy of that clause, I sat alone in the warm light of my small apartment, listening to the night wind knocking against the window like a reminder. I knew I wasn't wealthy like them. I knew I didn't have the leverage of flattery or social connections. But I had something they would never understand: the quiet persistence of a daughter long overlooked who never stopped loving that house. I knew from that moment on the game had shifted. And I, the one always left out of the picture, would be the last one to step into this story, not as an observer, but as the keeper of the flame. I placed the copy of the subclause on my desk, my hand brushing over the faint seal at the bottom of the page, as if touching a fragile thread that still connected me to my father. That night, I didn't rush to respond to Jasper. I just sat there alone in the room, where the streetlights outside cast a golden glow onto the white walls. I thought about those summer days at Seabreeze Manor, about the late evenings when my father would sit on the porch, a cup of black tea in his hand, and his voice low and deliberate as he spoke of his younger days. "Nora," he once said, "never let anyone else decide where you belong. Even when they don't say your name, You're still an irreplaceable part. I smiled faintly to myself, a smile without joy, just the recognition that I had nothing left to lose but memories. I started going through everything savings accounts, the small shares I held in the company I worked for, the balance I had built up over years of quiet, unacknowledged effort. I wasn't wealthy like Cecilia, who had always been accustomed to getting everything without asking, but I had enough to start. I printed every statement calculated down to the last cent, down to each number in the discretionary savings column. I wasn't looking to make a show of it. I just needed to be sure that when I stepped into those negotiations, I wasn't relying on anyone but myself. I called Isabel not with urgency, but without fear. She picked up my call with a more cautious tone than before. I want to buy back Seabreeze Manor. I said, my voice calm and oddly steady, as if I were discussing a technical detail in a work project. Isabel was silent for a second, then tried to keep her tone polite. Ah, are you sure, Nora? Because the paperwork is in its final stage? I'm sure, I replied. And I have the legal right to do it. I scheduled a meeting with my lawyer, asked Jasper to prepare all the necessary documents. I didn't let any hint of doubt show on the outside. I laid everything out on the table, every page, every number, every clause, as if I were building a bridge back between the past and the present. When I signed the deposit agreement under the name Nora Collins, part of me was still trembling. Not from fear, but from the tremor of someone who had finally dared to step into the story they had always been kept out of. I pressed the pen to the page, each stroke of black ink sinking deep, like it was sealing in the quiet ache that had grown inside me for 10 years. And when I sent the booking request to Seabreeze Manor for the first night as the new owner, I tapped lightly on the special requests box. A bottle of chilled Perrier Jouet white cotton linens, absolute privacy. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just knew that this time I was no longer standing on the margins. This time, I was the one writing the next chapter of the story line by line, word by word. I arrived earlier than the check-in time, standing before the white wooden gates of Seabreeze Manor, taking a deep breath of the salty air from the sea. The house seemed smaller than I remembered, or maybe I had finally grown up enough to see it with eyes no longer blinded by hope. I pushed open the gate and walked along the stone path covered in moss, the path I used to run barefoot on as a child, leaving small footprints on the damp earth. The sound of the waves crashed in my ears, mingling with the wind that rustled through the willow trees, casting their shadows over the porch. All of it like a quiet background score for a play in which I knew I was meant to be the lead. I didn't have a large suitcase, just a black handbag enough to hold a few changes of clothes, and the important documents I had spent many sleepless nights preparing. Inside the house, the air still held the musty scent of old wood and the hint of lavender that my mother used to love. I moved slowly through each room, my hand brushing lightly over the cabinet doors that my father had once hammered back into place when they began to slip. I didn't turn on the lights. I wanted to let the natural light of the late afternoon spill in, painting long streaks of sun across the dark wooden floorboards, as if to prove that this house was still breathing, still waiting. I stopped in the living room, where the green armchair stood, the one my father used to sit in every night to read. I rested my hand on the worn cushion, feeling the slight give of the old stuffing, then closed my eyes, almost hearing his voice echo somewhere within these walls. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. There was only a peaceful stillness threading through every breath I took. When I left the living room, I stepped out onto the front porch, looking down the narrow path that led to the beach. The windows were still open, as if inviting me, in the paper lanterns hanging from the eaves, swaying gently in the sea breeze, making a soft clinking sound, like the clink of glasses at a party long ago. I knew that in just a few minutes, Cecilia's car would arrive. I could already hear the engine from a distance, the tires crunching over the gravel, carrying a family that had forgotten me, but still believed they could control everything. I stood straight, the black bag in my hand, like a silent declaration. Just as they arrived and the car door swung open, Cecilia stepped out first, her golden hair as perfectly combed as it was in those family photos. Her husband followed, then the children, their laughter ringing out as if there had never been an empty space in their world. But when they approached the front desk, the young receptionist with platinum hair bowed slightly, her voice calm as a still lake. "I'm sorry, but your name isn't on the guest list." Cecilia froze, her eyes shifting from confusion to surprise. "What do you mean we've always stayed here?" The receptionist repeated gently but firmly. "The ownership has changed. The reservation is only under the name Nora Collins." I didn't wait. I stepped out from the porch, my high heels tapping a steady rhythm on the old tile floor, each step sure and calm. "I am Nora Collins," I said, my voice ringing out like the final hammer blow. "I am the new owner. And today, Seabreeze Manor only welcomes those who know how to honor its memories." I thought that the moment they looked at me with those empty eyes would be the period at the end of every hurt. But I was wrong. As soon as the door closed behind them, the next morning began with a different sound, the screech of tires on the gravel road outside the gate. A news van pulled up right in front of Seabreeze Manor, camera lights flashing in the sunlight, a man in a neat suit adjusting his tie in the rearview mirror before quickly stepping out with a microphone in hand. I didn't open the door, just stood behind the curtain, quietly watching them set up the camera, framing their shot in front of the white wooden fence my father had once repainted with his own hands. Beyond the fence, the man's voice rang out strong and sure. "Breaking news this morning: Nora Collins, the unfamiliar heir, has used a legal loophole to seize Seabreeze Manor, the Marston family estate." I didn't feel a flicker of fear, only a wry smile crossing my lips. They had always been good at crafting pretty stories: the parties, the glowing photos, the family dinners with every seat filled, but they were just as skilled at turning any child who didn't fit into the perfect mold into the perfect villain. My phone immediately buzzed, messages from old friends, from colleagues who had never heard me speak of the family's dark side. "Are you okay? Is this really true? Nora, why didn't you ever say anything?" I knew they didn't really expect an answer, just wanted to fill the silence with polite questions. I set the phone down, poured myself a cup of black tea, and stepped out onto the back porch where the waves kept washing up on the sand as if they had never heard of human deceit. I didn't answer. Anyone didn't appear in front of the camera, didn't write any clarifying post on social media. I only called Jasper, my voice calm but unwavering, as I said, "They've started." "Don't worry," Jasper said, his voice like a rope tying me firmly to the ground. "You've been silent long enough. Let me handle the rest." A sigh slipped out, not from exhaustion, but because I had been waiting for this moment for so long. I didn't need to shout to defend myself, didn't need to argue with anyone. I just needed one person patient enough to understand the truth. When I went back inside to the living room, I opened my laptop, digging through old emails, the messages Cecilia had once sent with that gentle, condescending tone. "You'll be fine, Nora, don't concern yourself with things that don't belong to you." I saved them all, each line like a needle stitching my memories back together. I knew soon I would give them to Jasper. And when that happened, not a single lie would be able to survive. I took a sip of tea, let the bitterness bloom across my tongue, and thought quietly, they can slander me in front of the camera, but they don't know that I already have another story prepared. The story that this time, no one will be able to stop. I didn't choose to confront them with counter articles or angry posts on social media because I understood that silence is sometimes more powerful than any defense. I sent Jasper everything I had kept: emails, messages, those accidentally overheard recordings from family video calls, every word from Cecilia, every sigh from my mother when she thought I couldn't hear. Jasper read through them, his voice growing low, not from surprise, but from realizing that this was no longer just an ordinary dispute. "They've spun a story to make you look like the greedy one," he said, But they forgot they left their own contempt so exposed they didn't even realize you were still listening. I said nothing, just nodded, then sent him the final video. The one of my father sitting in that old armchair, his voice weak but still warm. Nora, he said this place is yours. Cecilia knows how to make things lively, but only you know how to keep them lasting. I listened to every word he spoke, not just with my ears, but with my heart. A heart still cracked from years of being overlooked, but one that had never stopped beating for this family. I didn't post that video online, didn't send it to any news outlet. I sent it to Jasper so it would be exactly where it needed to be, in the hands of the law, in the record of those who always thought they could bury the truth under the dust of sweet lies. That morning, when I woke up, the sunlight had already crept through the curtains, casting a golden glow over the pristine white blanket like a new beginning. I made a pot of tea, set the cup on the table like a small ritual. This was the day I would let the truth speak for itself. The day they would have to say my name in the stories they had once tried to erase me from. When I sent that last email to Jasper, I felt a strange peace, as if for the first time in 10 years I was no longer the outsider. I didn't know what they would say, what arguments they would twist to reshape my story, but I knew that this time I had in my hands not just evidence, but living memories, a heart that refused to be forgotten. I told myself they can build a world of bright illusions, but I have the real story, and the truth never has to shout too loud to be heard. On the day of the trial, I chose a deep blue dress the color of the night sea, a shade that wasn't flashy but was deep enough to make others unable to look away. I arrived early, sitting in a corner of the long hallway holding a small notebook like a shield to protect me from the scrutinizing gazes of strangers. When the courtroom doors opened, I walked in, not bowing my head, not looking for a place to hide. Cecilia was already there, her golden hair pinned high, her face carefully made up as if she were attending an elegant party. My mother sat beside her, her pale dress unable to mask the worry in her eyes. They looked at me then, at their lawyer, a young man with a thin smile and cold, sharp eyes. But I didn't pay attention to them, only to Jasper, my friend, who had always believed in me, calmly arranging papers with an almost eerie composure. When the judge entered the room, suddenly went quiet like the surface of water before a storm. I listened to every accusation from their side that I had taken advantage of my father when he was no longer of sound mind, that I was the ungrateful child returning only to seize what wasn't mine. Each accusation was like a knife cutting through the air, but I didn't let it touch my heart. I just looked at Jasper, and when it was my turn, he gave me a signal. I stood up, opened the laptop I had prepared, and played on the big screen the video my father had left behind. He appeared, his face lined with the years, his voice still steady like when I was a child. Nora, he said, this place is yours. Cecilia can make it loud, but only you can make it last. You are the memory of this family. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I heard a quiet sniffle behind me, but I didn't turn around. I only looked straight at the screen as if I were still looking into his eyes, letting his words merge with my breath stronger than any accusation. When the video ended, the room remained silent. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice deep as the crashing waves. This court finds no evidence of coercion or fraud. The will of Mr. Henry Collins is fully legally valid. The petition is dismissed. The sound of the gavel fell, a simple sound that rang out like a final bell, ending all the lies, all the silences I had once swallowed. I didn't smile as I gathered my files. I didn't look at Cecilia or my mother. I only walked out of the courtroom, each step like stepping out of the shadow they had cast over me for 10 long years. And in that moment, I knew I was no longer the outsider. When I returned to Seabreeze Manor, the sun was already low, the sunset stretching across the sea like a shimmering honey-colored ribbon. There were no more fake laughs or carefully painted lies, only the sea breeze brushing across the porch, and the waves patiently lapping the shore like a steady breath. I stood on the steps, my hand resting lightly on the wooden door my father once painted, my palms still warm with the echo of the hardships I had overcome. I stepped inside one step at a time, feeling the dampness of the old wooden floors, the faint scent of lavender still clinging to the little cabinet my mother had once kept in the living room. I walked through each room not to check or rearrange, but just to listen. Every slant of sunlight through the windows, every old armchair seemed to whisper the same thing: you have come back. When I opened the last drawer in my father's study, I found the old wind chime we had made together, pure white seashells, the beech twine now worn but still strong. I took it out to the front porch, hanging it right where it used to be, listening to the familiar sound of it singing in the breeze from the sea. Savannah appeared not long after, bringing a bottle of wine and an understanding smile. "You didn't think I'd let you do this alone, did you?" she said, with a soft laugh, and I smiled back. Truly smiled this time, with no bitterness, no hesitation. Together we scrubbed the wooden floors, washed the windows that had grown hazy with sea salt. Each movement felt like a ritual, a way to wash away the invisible marks that time and people had left behind. We didn't say much, only glancing at each other now, and then our eyes saying what words didn't need to. At last, you've become yourself. When night fell, we sat on the porch, 2 glasses of wine glinting under the warm light. I looked out to the sea where the darkness was swallowing everything, yet tiny lights from fishing boats still shone like distant stars. "What will you do next?" Savannah asked, her voice no louder than a breath. I drew in a deep breath, tasting the salt of the sea air between my teeth. "They say I left," I said slowly, "but the truth is I never disappeared. They just didn't want to see me. We didn't raise our glasses in a toast, didn't shout any triumph. We just sat there quiet and at peace, listening to the waves that never stopped telling their story, no matter how hard the world tried to bury them. When I left, I turned off every light in the house, room by room, corner by corner, as if closing an old chapter to begin a new one. I knew that tomorrow might bring more rumors, more stories spun up. But this time I was no longer an outsider. I had become a part of the house, a part of the memory that no one could erase. And if this story touches someone out there, someone who has ever been pushed to the margins, I just want to say this: we are not alone, and silence will not be the victor anymore. Amidst the endless sound of the waves crashing against the shore, my story closes not with a loud victory or a happily ever after, but with the quiet of someone who has found their place again in the very memory they were once erased from. Seabreeze Manor now is not just a house of old photos or faded promises, but a testament that the truth will always find its voice, whether through a whisper, a forgotten will, or a heart that refuses to stop believing in its own worth. If this story has touched some quiet corner of you, a corner of memories of silent pride no one else sees, leave a comment or even just a word. Because this time, silence is no longer the victor. And I believe within each of us there is a memory worth holding on to no matter what.